Two vascular surgeons walk into a bar and come out with a podcast. We are talking everything vascular and not. Welcome to the Life of Flow podcast.
The following podcast is not relating to my teachings and work at Del Cedar Medical Center and is for entertainment purposes only.
Bienvenidos! It is another episode of the Life of Flow podcast. And today is really an absolute honor. I've been trying to track down this guest for a while. Super busy guy, but probably one of the coolest guys I know. We've been good friends and colleagues for now many years. I really wanted to nail down his career path from being at Mass General, from being at the top of his game to moving into, pushing a new hospital system leadership and eventually doing what seemed at the time a radical change into the leadership position as Chief Medical Officer for Boston Scientific. I'm talking about Mike Jaff, who is, again, CMO and Vice President currently of Peripheral Interventions at BSCI, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Mike is a stud, great knowledge, great insights, and it was just an overall amazing conversation. So hopefully you stick around and enjoy it as much as we did.
Another great one. Vamos.
Well, man, thanks for coming. Mike's been a guy that I've just enjoyed throughout the years. The balance, the professionalism, and the way that you've been able to articulate on so many topics during my career in this kind of world of vascular care and endovascular care has been something that's been very refreshing and very inspiring, I'll say, because it's not every day that you get yourself some of these people that you just love to hear. And you're just one of those, man. So thank you for doing what you've done, and you're always bringing that sense of balance and into the picture.
Well, thank you, Miguel. Any chance to hang out with you, I'll never turn down. So I appreciate the opportunity.
When did you guys first meet?
Well, I mean, I at least 10 years or above.
Yeah.
It was probably at Link when I was still doing my fellowship with Andre and Dirk.
Oh.
And that was 2006. So probably more than 10 years at this
more
point.
Than 10 years.
Yeah, I was going to say longer than that for sure.
Yeah. And so, Mike, one of the things that I'd love to just dive, because I guess the one of the reasons why we started this podcast is because Lucas and I would say, man, one of the greatest things about going to a scientific meeting, other than the science, is having those moments where you kick back and you talk to the people that you like, that you respect, and you get to connect because they're in a different part of the world or they're in a different part of the country, but then they're far and beyond sometimes. And sometimes you'll miss a meeting or you'll miss somebody and then it'll be a year or two and you don't see them. And so in that sense, here's me being absolutely selfish and taking over today's podcast to fill in the blanks of what should be a conversation that me and Mike should have had a long time ago. It's a big decision. And I thought it's one of those that everybody kind of remembers where they're at when that happened. I know you may not feel, Mike, that it was that transcendental, but I feel like a lot of us even texted back and forth like, hey, did you hear Mike went to Boston? Like, he's now going to be the chief medical officer? It was a big thing. It for me, it was like kind of a rumble and a big moment. And so I'd like to hear a little bit more of that. Let's set the stage with what was happening in your career leading up to the point where you decided to step down from your clinical practice and step into this role that made you even consider at that point? What was happening with you?
Well, Lucas and Miguel, you guys both remember that in my career, as I was kind of making my way, I was pretty outspoken that physicians who went to work for industry had lost their way. And here I am, completely lost. So everything is timing. I tell this to my trainees. I tell this to people who ask, how'd you get here? It's all timing. It was definitely not a plan. I didn't set out to be the chief medical officer of a medical device company. I was in probably the best job I ever could have had in healthcare, running the vascular center at Mass General. Everything in my career was on the upswing. VasCore was incredibly productive. My clinical practice had really become the bizarre and the weird of vascular disease, which I just loved. My kids were happy in Boston. I mean, everything was just perfect. And then I got recruited to become president of a hospital in suburban Boston. And that was the moment where I probably should have called you, Miguel, and said, hey, I got this opportunity. What do you think? And you would have said, don't be an idiot. But I took the challenge. And it was by far and away the hardest, most frustrating, and least rewarding thing I've done in my career. And the answer to that really centers on the fact that I took that job with one intention alone. Who better than to make a hospital doctor friendly than a doctor, right? I mean, a simple concept. Healthcare, even this was pre-COVID, healthcare was in an upheaval. Physician burnout was a big topic of conversation. Reimbursement continued to be a challenge. The future didn't look that bright, and doctors were unhappy. And so I took the job of running a hospital where physicians were really unhappy. And I honestly thought that because I understood the life of a physician and I committed to continue to see patients as the hospital president, that I could make life better. And I couldn't. I couldn't do it.
Where do you think hinges the greatest miscalculation? Is it just the doctor syndrome that we think that we can tackle any complex problem? What was the biggest miscalculation on your algorithm thinking going in? I've got A, X, Y, and Z tools, and I'm going to apply those, and I'm gonna rock this place. I'm gonna turn it
Yeah.
in, and
And by the way, that's exactly what I thought. I went into this thinking, I'm going to make this a model for hospitals in the United States. Like I didn't even look, I'm going to make it a model in Boston or Massachusetts. That was really my goal. And I was completely wrong. I mean, I could not have been more wrong. And the reasons I think were one, naivete, two, a belief that my ability to engage with people, and you know me, I mean, I think I'm an honest broker who works
straight
hard and
shooter, straight shooter.
and
Yep.
says right and also lives up to my commitment. Like if I say I'm going to do something, I do it. I think that reputation and that belief in myself, I thought I could do running a 6,500 employee business. And here were the challenges that I completely misunderstood. One I kind of understood was I don't control how doctors get paid. Right. I don't make the reimbursement scheme. I did have ideas on how to make that reimbursement much fairer for doctors within the budget that I controlled. But the overall amount of cash coming in, I couldn't change. Right. So I figured, well, I'll be really good at philanthropy. Like I'll raise a lot of money and that'll help either endowments for physicians to support their comp, allied health providers to make their jobs easier, a commitment to improve the electronic health records so that they weren't tethered to the computer all day. I mean, those were kind of the things that I thought I could do. And the second one that I completely misjudged was the fact that I had come from the Mass General and I was going to a community hospital within that same health system. So I figured because of my relationships at MGH and at the Brigham, that I would have a credibility factor that would allow us to do things that would really be transformative. And you know what, Miguel? When I left MGH, with everybody congratulating me as I walked out the door, I went from becoming an endowed professor at Harvard to a local community doc who didn't know anything in the eyes of the academic medical systems. Can you imagine that? I did not anticipate that. And so when I tried to do innovative things to change the lives of doctors, my health system came down to me and said, hey, pal, you're just a community hospital. Sit back and let us do the cool stuff, and you'll get whatever benefits we can get. And it just got to be crazy ridiculous. And then the third thing I would say, I don't know about you guys, but I've never had to interact with an organized labor union. But I walked into a hospital where the nursing staff were all unionized by a very strong, very outspoken and rabble-rousing nursing union, the Mass Nurses Association. And let me tell you, that was a sobering experience. Imagine this, Miguel. I couldn't have a conversation with the nurse in the ED because she was the representative of the Mass Nurses Association, and we were on opposite sides of the fence. I could only talk about the patient they were taking care of that was mine. The minute I said, how are things going? I was over the line. I mean, it was really tough.
So how long was that tenure?
4 years. And I will say we had a couple of wins. You know, the hospital went from never being recognized by any external review source to the #1 community hospital in the state of Massachusetts in 2 years. So, I mean, we had some, we turned the finances around. We did some novel things, but it was what it was.
How early into that 4-year tenure did you accept defeat?
I sat in my office around the 45th day and I said to myself, what did I do? I gave up the best job I could have ever had for this. I guess defeat, I never really in my heart said, well, you've lost, but I certainly, when the opportunity to consider Boston Scientific came around and the negotiations became serious, it wasn't hard for me to make that choice.
Yeah, and so that's maybe me misspeaking and saying that it was a defeat, because at the end of the day, every one of our journeys leads to the next one. And
Yeah.
what seems at the time that may be, a loss, all said and done, and you look back and it was just part of a journey. It was part of something that you needed to learn or endure or suffer in order to discover another part of you that would then help you move on to the next better phase. When you see things through that optics, you should remove the word defeat, right? Maybe, I could say and word it, how early did you realize that was probably not going to be a long-term plan? And it seems like this 45-day mark
It's pretty,
Yeah.
is pretty
yeah,
early,
yeah.
which made for
No honeymoon
for a
phase.
lot of
Yeah.
bad days.
Yeah, I would say that my fear kind of 2 years into it was this was how my career was going to end. Like I had such a fun career. I got to do so many cool things. I mean, I lived through the explosive growth of endovascular therapy in a field that when I was training, surgery was and medicine were only the options. There was no endovascular. So, I mean, what a great opportunity to watch and to see guys like you guys take this and run to a different level. So I was actually pretty morose to think that my career was going to end as a hospital president. So I was just lucky. Again, as you said, opportunities come and you just got to be in the right time in the right place.
We usually talk here quite a bit about the conflict between hospital physician, between independent practice and hospital practice. And, from what you're saying and some of the other conversations we've had, there are two opposing forces, in my opinion. There's a need from the physician, from the patient to have a better experience, for the physician to have autonomy and to have a satisfying career. But medicine is extremely satisfying under the right conditions. And then there is the opposing force of kind of like these big healthcare system swallowing everything up and having capture of regulations and all this stuff that limit the ability of physicians to be independent. But as you say, that the experience for both the physician and the patient can be so horrible. Which one do you think is going to win out in the long run? Say from here to 20 years, are we going to be in the same spot? Are physicians going to creep more, or are big hospital systems just going to eat us alive?
You mean like migrate out? Because if you look at the waves, there's moments in time where there's been a huge migration into the hospital base.
Yeah.
And it seems to me like now there's a little bit of an exodus.
Yeah. Which one of those forces do you think is going to win out? The all-encompassing, agglomerating one, or the independence, creating new alternatives one?
Yeah. First of all, the three of us, as we speak today, are living on the heels of one of the really most unsettling events, the murder of the CEO of United Healthcare in cold blood right in front of the Veith Hotel, Miguel.
Right.
Yeah.
1 week after the Veith meeting,
1 week
right?
after Veith,
I
yeah.
was on that sidewalk.
Yeah,
on
sidewalk.
the sidewalk
Yeah.
a week before
Yeah.
that.
So same as me. So we're living at a time when the public, now I'm not advocating that what this guy did was anything more than heinous. And unfortunately, there is a public outcry to support what he did, which I think is just unacceptable. However, the sentiment is widely felt across the patient population in the United States that you work hard, you raise a family, you do your work, and you deserve health care. And it's a battle in every sense. Every sense. Insurance is a battle, right? No matter how much premium you pay, insurance coverage is a battle.
I would say, like, mass harm by spreadsheet is not as visually compelling and doesn't create that visceral reaction. But I would say it might be worse, in quantity and severity and amplitude. So I'm not saying that violence is the answer to anything, but just because the violence is being committed in a physical form and not in a spreadsheet, I think we have to have an honest conversation about that, because human beings are human beings, and they're going to have reactions. So if we keep committing the same actions, we're going to have the same reactions, and then we're going to say, oh, like, this is horrible. But we have to internalize what we're doing and act upon it, because there is great suffering where there shouldn't be great suffering.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, the senator of Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, this past week was quoted as saying something to the effect of, everybody involved in organized healthcare better pay attention to what happened. Like, there's just so far you can push people who are sick or their families are sick and they need medical attention and they can't get it because an insurer says no. Like, there's just so far you can go. The other thing I would say is, guys, let's face it, you are the future of US healthcare. And I'm not saying that because I'm on your podcast. I'm saying it because, Miguel, I talked to you about this as soon as you said what you were doing. Because in my hospital, I couldn't fix certain basic things that infuriate patients. I couldn't fix the parking, right? I couldn't fix the fact that it took following a blue stripe along the floor for a mile in an elevator with people with Foley's and NG tube drains, all to go for an outpatient test. And I mean, I couldn't fix that stuff. I couldn't fix the fact that when they check into my X unit in the hospital, the employee wouldn't say, hello, Mrs. Jones, how are you today? Right? I mean, just basic good behavior. You guys have figured that out. And the only thing that hasn't caught up to you is the fact that the payers haven't understood that you provide an answer for what patients want. You provide an avenue for doctors to regain control of their lives so that they can provide better health care to patients. I mean, it's a win-win across the board. And that's the only reason that it hasn't completely revolutionized healthcare. But Lucas, to answer your question, I truly don't believe that the future is continued amalgamation of large health systems at the expense of what patients want and what doctors want. These systems can't run without you two. They can't. They can say that they're going to hire more and more allied health professionals and they're going to use robotics and artificial intelligence. But Miguel, you're touching the end of the catheter that I need you to use on me when I need it. And I want to be able to go there knowing the doctor I went to see is doing my procedure. I heard a story the other day, guys, of a physician who needed a procedure on a cancer of a kidney on himself. And he asked around the country to find out who was the best. And he found a doctor who was the best, met him over Zoom, like a telehealth visit, because the guy was going to fly in out of town. They've got everything booked. This is the God's truth, Miguel. He went there. They started the IV. They started to give him sedation. And they heard the nurse say, call Dr. So-and-so. And it wasn't the doctor who he was arranged to see. So before he completely fell asleep, he started yelling, wait a minute, that's not my doctor. And they said, well, that's the doctor available to do your case.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Oh,
Guys,
wow.
this is one of us that this happens on.
That gives me chills
Yeah.
to think that that's where we're at.
Yeah.
I don't want to go too far out in this tangent, but why do you think that the insurance carriers have not necessarily sat behind us with the concept of appropriate outpatient care more, because for me, that's, to your point, that's the last part of this, of this perfect scenario that could create alignment. Because I even call it a concierge outpatient service for vascular care. Patients come, it's like a family. It's the same people you see from the door to your procedure to the hospital. Everything's vertically integrated. It's beautiful. But guess what? It aches and it's dimes and nickels. And when it comes to what happens in the hospital, it's exactly the same procedure that I can offer, and possibly even with less material or less technical skills. But the insurance provider deploys 20 times more to the hospital than they do to the outpatient community. So I don't understand why yet the Blue Cross Blue Shields have not stood up and said, we are going to find metrics of quality, because, in every system, in the hospital or in outpatient, there's going to be people that don't do things responsibly. But under certain metrics of quality and objective performance goals, we are going to support 100%, because guess what? We're going to save money, and the patients are going to be happier, and the doctors are going to be happier. It sounds to me just like such an obvious answer to, and I'm not saying hospitals need to go away. Tertiary centers need to exist because not everybody will get, but the majority of things probably could be done in a much more simplistic way. Why do you think that has not happened yet?
I'll give you three obvious reasons. Three obvious answers. None of them are going to make you happy. One of them, hospital is an incredibly strong lobby politically. They are way more organized as a voice than you are. That's number one. Number two, physicians don't speak with one voice. As much as the three of us realize that what you're doing is absolutely what most, if not all, patients would want, compared to fighting with parking, getting lost in a hospital, not knowing who their care provider is. There are others among us who argue that care done outside of a hospital is inferior, is unsafe, blah, blah, blah. So that's number two. We don't speak with one voice. We're often our own worst enemy. And then the third answer I would give you is, I don't think we've made a strong enough, compelling argument to payers on a cost outcomes basis. I don't think we've told the story in a business way that insurers would understand. Because let's face it, they are in a business and they've got shareholders to represent. And so I don't think we've done a good enough job putting that business case together, even in a market, not nationwide, just a market, to a payer to drive a model. Those are my three off the top of my head answers.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't like any of them.
Sorry.
Because
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like I can change many of them.
I think one baseline before we're able to move forward with this is to create a culture between all of us doing these type of procedures where, the 10% that give us a bad rep.
I would say probably 1% or less, by the way. I don't
Okay.
think 10% sounds
That's fine.
overreaching.
Yeah. All right. So 1% that give us, the bad headlines there's a way to flush them out. There's a way to self-police. And that sounds horrible because obviously I would want to be very respectful and kind to all of my colleagues that I know go through this and know go through this battle of taking care of patients and helping people. But there is some self-policing that has to be done, because I do think that freedom, in a sense of like financial freedom to deploy your own version of what things should be, will lead to innovation. Because the more ideas you have competing, the ideas will compete with each other. And Miguel has an idea of how to do it. I have one idea. His idea is better, is more efficient. It will win. I will adopt it, and that's how we evolve. So I think that to move forward in this, we need that. But first of all, how do we create a culture of responsibility, within our field, within our colleague, and but trying to maximize freedom to innovate?
In my view, the answer to that rests solely on proving the quality of the work that you do. And Miguel, you might remember this, but 2014, I spoke at OEIS about the future of outpatient facilities. And I said, the only thing that could stop this from happening is if you guys don't demonstrate quality.
I'll answer as a politician here and say, you know what's not going to get us there? Because you want the answer to what will get us there. But you know what's not going to get us there is taking this to the media and creating all sorts of rackets without any guardrails and letting this be.
We have to take some responsibility because before it gets to the media, it gets to us. We see what's going on in our communities. We know, like, when we see something egregious, and a lot of the times we don't feel like we have a mechanism to say, hey, you
You
shouldn't be
probably
doing
don't get
this.
the emails from the Texas Medical Board then,
No,
because
we
there's
do. We do.
on a monthly
Yeah,
basis,
I know.
there's hundreds of physicians that are being investigated,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah.
And that just happens. And there
Yeah.
are systems. I mean, it's not like it's, Texas is a cowboy land, but it's not like everybody just does whatever they want. And you can anonymously report a lot of people. The thing is that then you have to trust that that states are going to have appropriately, seen the activity. And if
So we're
they've
gonna leave it to the state to do this. I'm
to the
saying,
boards of the state,
yeah. Is there something that we could do as
who is
we vascular professionals?
we're not organized. We don't have a
Yeah,
voice.
yeah.
So, the moment that that's what I was saying. So what's not going to help is going out and going into an societal battle of, vascular surgeons are the only ones that should do this,
Yeah.
and we're the only ones adequately trained
Yeah,
to do this.
yeah.
That's the wrong way to go about this. I think, if you get the SVS and you get these and you get this and you start talking about collaboration and you start talking about training, and you start talking about quality metrics, to your point, Mike, I think that at least sets the stage that we can then, okay, well, what do we do then to, because if there's no evidence or quality, and what means quality, because I can't, I've debated Mike Conti so many times on objective performance goals, and we're still not clear on what it is. So it's it's hard to say, okay, you're going to police me, fine, on what?
Yeah.
If the guidelines are also a little bit like hocus pocus.
Yeah.
So we're not getting there anytime soon, but I sure hope that there is some generational push. Here's what I do hope. I am hopeful about one thing. I am hopeful that the newer generations of physicians and specialists are willing and able to talk to each other more. That's what I'm hopeful for. I think that the vascular surgeon from 20 years ago and the vascular surgeon 20 years from today are going to be two radically different people.
Yeah.
Radically different. And I think therein potentially lays some change. Anyway, let's get back on track. Mike, so the project, this project you were doing wasn't necessarily going to be something, it wasn't leading to what you thought would be. It wasn't becoming this trampoline of transformative care. You weren't able to get your projects the way they did. Did you start considering, okay, well, I'm going to go just back to Mass General, like, or I'm going to quit on this. Maybe I'll go to another hospital. Was that percolating about, okay, well, I'm going to shift because I may, I'll sink with the ship, and then this cannot be the end of my career. I'm so successful. Everything's been so good to me that I don't foresee this being the way I want to go out.
I didn't think to go back to MGH. I was thinking about things like deans of medical schools, department heads, things like that. But then this opportunity came along from two of the most remarkable people I've known and worked for, and it just was like a perfect timing opportunity.
Are you able to share who those people are?
Yeah, sure. Mike Mahoney and Jeff Mervis. So Mike Mahoney's the president of Boston Scientific, and Jeff Mervis is the president of all peripheral interventions. And the reason I say remarkable is they're remarkable for two things that I hold in the highest regard with people. One is they are as honest as the sun rises. What they say they mean, and what they say they're going to do, they do, which is not always the case in any branch of life, but certainly in business, it's not always the case. And number two, they're both scary smart. Like 10 steps ahead of me pretty much all the time. And those are skills and qualities that attracted me to consider this opportunity. And frankly, Miguel, they made it a great opportunity. I didn't have to move. I didn't have to work full time. I could do other stuff that I was interested in. I'd be the part I was most intrigued by in the job was learning how a big company either invests in or buys a new technology. Like, what does that look like? What's the diligence? What's the deal? Like, how do they negotiate? It's a black box to me. And so I said, look, if you're going to bring me inside, put me on that team. And so it's just been an incredible learning experience.
We just aired the podcast with the leadership team at LymphFlow. So Sean Chakravarty, who is the CMO for that division. And we try to poke around about what was happening behind closed doors between Inari and LymphFlow as they got to this $450 million deal. And we didn't get much of anything.
He was very
so
politically.
they are black boxes, and it's funny because we just had one where we're all very tickled by what happens. How does this diligence happen? How many metrics? What are you looking for? Is the technology applicable, expandable? Is there a growing market? How do you calculate that? The numbers behind it, the science behind it. It's, for me, it's very intriguing. So I could see how that can capture your attention. So did these guys know you were potentially looking, or was it very serendipitous that they just started floating this idea and it just came to fruition?
Yeah, it was serendipity. They had decided that they needed a chief medical officer for that division. They had never had one before. They both knew me, and that's how it started.
That's awesome, man. All right, let's fast forward about what so you decide, okay, done. I'm going to move. I'm going to do. Did that imply moving? No. Did you have
No,
to change
didn't have to
locations?
move.
No. You could stay in your place. You didn't have to shake the house too much, and you take on this big responsibility.
What are the expectations for the chief medical officer? What value did they want you to provide?
What a great question, Lucas.
Thank you. I'm getting better at this.
Several components. One, I am directly responsible for all research and education in our division, and I'm responsible for obviously new technology assessment, diligence, etc. And then the other part that wasn't quite as explicitly stated, but now that I've been in the company is clear, is to go out and talk with doctors, particularly doctors who are not that Boston Scientific friendly, to talk about our data and assist in that stuff. So those are generally the components. There's some other stuff that I do. The company's got an incredibly long 25-year commitment to addressing and reducing disparities in healthcare. Miguel, that's something I've published a lot about in my life. So I've gotten involved in that, which has been incredibly rewarding. But Lucas, that's generally what my job is.
What are the frontiers right now in peripheral interventions where you are that excite you? Like, what problems excite you that you think should be solved and will be solved, and you want to be a part of that?
It's a great question. What I love is that there's continued appetite to advance minimally invasive care. And things that even today may not be truly minimally invasive have a potential to become even less traumatic to patients. And I will tell you that one area that I didn't know anything about before I started, that I'm incredibly excited about now, is the entire approach to cancer therapy through minimally invasive methods. And I know that that's something outside of what a vascular specialist often thinks about. But let me tell you guys, what's happening in that field is like what this was 20 years ago. And it's just going to be a great advance for patients.
Just to be clear, you're overseeing all divisions, or no?
Vascular and cancer, just peripheral interventions.
So is cancer an independent division?
No, it's part of ours.
Vascular and cancer are under one division somehow.
Yep.
Interesting. So are we talking about most of these like radiation embolic devices and so much to do targeted care and such? The revolution there is tremendous, isn't it?
Yeah, it's unbelievable, Miguel. Very exciting.
Do you think that cancer care would eventually migrate again back out to the community? Here's the deal. I love cancer in the sense that I think that the clinical organization that they've been able to create was phenomenal. When the efforts to classify and to put a lot of data in and to really understand how to do what and what responds in what way, the TNM and the development of that is for me like what Wi-Fi has become, right? We finally created this tool that looks at these high risk metrics, and we can start finding the way to then fine tune it. And so, why is that important? Well, to your point before, Lucas, it's important because until we speak one language, all of us, we can create the guardrails or the clinical path of success. And I believe cancer care is one where that's fairly well established. Where, hey, for this, with this met, with this characteristic, with this size, then this is what the appropriate steps are to take. And so if you can follow that, then you're going to stay within what is the norm of care. But now, with those guardrails and with that, with the blueprints rather explicitly out there, then the migration from cancer centers, which are hospital based, big, costly systems, to potentially smaller outpatient based places where now somebody can come in and get a minimally invasive 10, 20-minute procedure for their cancer 20 minutes away from their house and go home, for me is they have the structure to go there, where we did it the other way around. We did it kind of ass backwards. We went out, provided outpatient care, but we had no clear guideline on what to do when and how. And so then now things are going to be, are being pulled back in before they can go back out. So your thoughts on this potentially happening to pushing cancer care to being a community-based practice?
Having watched what your specialty and others have done with complex vascular disease that used to be 4 days, 5 days, 7 days in the hospital to out the same day with equal or better results, it is naive and ostrich-like to think the same thing won't happen in cancer care.
Should vascular surgeons dip their toes in this, given that we have the same skills as wire-wise and stuff?
I think the only thing I would say is you understand vascular disease better than anybody. You gotta get to the same place in cancer care. It can't just be you'll put the catheter in and do something. You got to understand where that fits into the disease process. Because I think what's going to happen is you're going to see a migration away from large systemic chemotherapy doses to targeted interventional procedures with smaller doses of chemotherapy that's more targeted. And so I definitely think there's a role for the interventionist as long as there are card carriers in the field, just like you are. You wouldn't be happy if somebody was taking care of CLTI with a catheter if they were, an internist, right? A non-trained internist. So that's all I would say.
Yeah, I think that the playing field is set, and a lot of these really great guys with great hands are doing a lot of embotherapy peripherally, right? Geniculate artery embolization, plantar fasciitis embolization, chronic painful shoulder embolizations. And I think these guys are probably going to be the ones that probably with some degree of fellowship training in minimally invasive oncologic therapy are going to be primed perfectly to start taking those cases.
Yeah.
And in coordination with, for example, in Houston, let's say MD Anderson is going to potentially have these outpatient facilities where they just they have IRs or specialty IRs that have oncologic specialties.
Yeah.
And then they just expand this. That's what I would see vision wise going there.
Yeah, I got to tell you, the interventional oncologists are really impressive. They not only are good at what they do, but they really understand the disease. They can stand at a tumor board and make their case very effectively. It's an impressive group.
So is this internal medicine, oncology, and then fellowship in interventional, or it's more like IR with a fellowship in onco IR? How do you get there?
It's more the latter, but just like nephrologists are trained as internists and nephrologists in interventional nephrology or neurology to interventional neurology, there's no reason to think that this wouldn't happen with a medically trained oncologist who then learns interventional skills.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
So, Mike, let's look at the good and the bad of this, and how much you would feel comfortable sharing. But it'd be nice for me to hear what was surprising, what you didn't expect that you love, and maybe what was something that has been a little bit harder to cope with and have to adapt to.
It's great. I think about this a lot, and I get asked this fairly often. So, what did I love that surprised me? First of all, and I know this is a bit of a generalization, but I suspect you feel as I do that there's a large swath of administrative management within hospitals and healthcare systems that you wouldn't say are necessarily Phi Beta Kappa. I was shockingly surprised at how smart the people within this company are to a person, to the point where I started off in Boston Scientific thinking, I'm the doctor. I've made my career. So they're going to listen to me. And I get into these meetings and I'm listening to these young, incredibly bright business development people, engineers, upstream marketing folks. And they literally made me sit up taller and like pay more attention and really listen because they're really smart. So that was a very pleasant shift from what I had come from. So that was very pleasant. Secondly, it has been a true comprehensive education to watch this company assess a technology for acquisition. I mean, Miguel, there is not a stone left unturned, and each part of that has an expert doing it. So put aside clinical stuff, like I look at the clinical data and assess whether I think the market's really there and will physicians adopt it and things like that. But you've got manufacturing, R&D, finance, legal, accounting, intellectual property. I mean, it is a dance that is really impressive to see. You know, you go through these diligence things where you go through the data room and you ask for things and you read tons of documents and you go meet with the team, often in the cloak of darkness because it's so confidential. And then at the end of the day, you got to sit there. It's a relatively small team and say thumbs up or thumbs down. And like, it's on you.
Very
If it doesn't work
gladiator.
out, yeah. But you know what I mean? You're like,
Yeah, no,
if it doesn't work out, like you can't say, hey, that was that guy's decision, not mine. It's not the way it is. So that was also a real fun, pleasant learning opportunity.
So a lot of the final decision is on you.
I wouldn't say it's me. I think it's on the diligence team. We make the final recommendation to the company, and then the company navigates the terms of the deal.
I'm sure you probably turned down a ton.
Yeah.
A lot of work to just say thumbs down.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
A lot
But
of
I will
times
tell you
too.
that another thing, Miguel, is that even though you turn down a lot, you learn what sells and what doesn't sell. And you know that old story. You'd rather have a great team with a mediocre technology than a great technology with a mediocre team. I can't tell you how true that is. I mean, there are companies that make pitches that the technology sounds good and we'll never meet with them again. So it's been fascinating.
What's the biggest thing that throws you off?
In a pitch,
Yeah.
I think there's an arrogance that comes across right off the bat that never sells well. The inability to show passion for what you're doing, which to the three of us seems crazy. Like, how could you not be passionate about a therapy that you're developing, but you don't feel it, right? If it doesn't come across, that's a big no. And then the inability to really answer questions on your feet. I mean, you do this all the time because you're stuck in cases where things don't go exactly the way you plan and you got to think on your feet. You're good at that, but there are people who aren't good or aren't prepared, and that's another strike.
Yeah, I always say that ever since the Leipzig days, I've been involved in startups and medtech, and now having our base of operations in Costa Rica, where we do a lot of first in mans, and actually, LimFlow is a company where we did a lot of early diligence with, helped them get to what they got. I always say you don't necessarily invest in the product, you invest on the founders, and I think that you're saying that in a different way, which is if I sit and I have a meeting and the person that's bringing that idea, it may be a radical and phenomenal idea, but if they don't have that heart, if that passion isn't there, if that commitment, if that energy, because in a way you need them to be part. I mean, you just don't take that off their hands, right? You need that team to, because a lot of times these M&As happen because they need the infusion to get to a next level, right? And sometimes, I mean, a lot of these diligence may be, okay, we're not going to acquire you, but we're going to have a silent seat on the board. And maybe we're going to put some money forward because this is tickled. You know, you're not ready for an acquisition, but maybe in 10 years or maybe in 2 years, you know, let's see how you guys do on sales, build a team, see how it does. And so there's a lot of these halfway experiments that also could be done, I'm sure, that allow for a lot of flexibility when it comes to that part.
And you keep mentioning LimFlow. Dan Rose is a perfect example. I mean, who better to tell a story about a new groundbreaking technology than Dan Rose?
Dan was here with us.
Yeah.
We had a great show with him, and he walked us through, you know, losing X amount of pounds, X amount of sleep, round after round after round, seeing the tunnel and that light becoming very, very dim, and then having to just pursue that until you get it. And I think those are stories of great success stories. Anyway, I asked you on the shiny side, but I also
Yep.
asked you the dark. So what would you be comfortable sharing about what's not been
Sure.
necessarily something that you've loved?
The easy one to answer is that travel's been overbearing, and it's not as much fun to travel now as it used to be, as you all know. But surprising and unhappy finding was that there's still quite a bit of bureaucracy in a company like this, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating for everybody in it, and I know it's frustrating for Mahoney and Mervis, but it is how it is. And quite honestly, in some situations, Miguel and Lucas, I would tell you that it borders on a similar degree of bureaucracy to hospitals, which is not a compliment at all. That's probably the biggest negative.
In their defense, don't you think that that is also a reaction to the regulatory, to the federal and local regulatory,
Burden.
you know, burden that's placed on these companies this big, this large, this into healthcare, yada yada?
You have no doubt you are correct. There are there's also the public market pressure and the way that the street reacts to things that I think puts pressure on the company and makes everybody cross their T's and dot their I's a few more times. But I will tell you that the founder's mentality, and if you haven't read that book, I know you guys have, but if, for the listeners, you got to read that book. The founder's mentality still exists at the highest levels of the company. It's just hard to filter it down to get to all functions at all layers. But it's something that the company constantly tries to do. It's just hard.
Who wrote The Founder's Mentality?
Uh,
Is it
Jim
Chris Zook and James Allen? Is that
James Allen. Yep.
James Allen? All right, we'll
Yep.
put that on
Put that in the
our
show notes,
notes, because we always do we write a newsletter, we send it to everybody that links, and we like to, any books that we reference, we like people to be able to go track. And I'll be very honest, out of all my favorite books, I don't think I've
haven't
read
read that
Founder's
either.
Mentality.
So
It's a fast read and you'll love it.
They say the 3 key concepts are insurgency, frontline obsession, and the owner's mindset. So there you go.
Exactly.
and with that, we'll close it.
Yeah, Mike, man, this is the 45 to 50 minutes that I asked for you, and I really do appreciate you doing this with us.
This was amazing. So thank you so much, Mike.
No, pleasure. Thank you guys. Congratulations.
We'll be in touch, and hopefully you'll be you'll come back on.
Love it.
I told you at the top of the show, we did this because we thought there was a need for an unbiased voice. If you ever feel that there's a need for Boston Scientific and or for Mike Jaff to have something important that the world should listen to, we would love to be part of that.
Oh, sounds great. I appreciate the opportunity, guys.
All right.
Yeah, Mike.
Thank you very much. Have a blessed evening.
Gracias.
Thank you. Good to see you.